Okay, well, John, thanks for joining.
Christopher?
I'm happy to have you on the Reluctant Psalm podcast. We are new to the video side of things. You're one of the first 5 interviewees, so apologies for any of my technical difficulties we might get through. But
not the first time I was a guinea pig.
So you're joining us from Langenried Winery, and I know that your children have their own project.
Right.
Do you have any other thing that you're doing on the side, or does the winery occupy the majority of your time?
It's really the winery.
Yeah.
I still consult a little bit. When Tracy and I started Langenried in 1996, I left my last legitimate paying job, which was the general manager of the Niebaum Coppola estate.
I see.
And I had always been doing private consulting. When I first moved to Napa Valley in '84, I worked for Cambus, and I was essentially on a 1099 deal with them. And to perfect their stuff, I had to have clients. And so I had 2 or 3 clients while I was working for Cambus. And then at Clos-de-Val, Bernard didn't want me to do that, but I maintained one of them, which was Jason Paulmeyer. And then with the Coppolas didn't mind. So I started to ramp it up at that time and had 2 or 3 clients while I was working for them. So there was a time right after I left Coppola, it really paid the mortgage for years. I'd had as many as 7 or 8 clients at any one time. Wow. I'm down to about 2 or special project things. Yeah. And right now it's to keep my finger in it. And I went from helping grape growers or farmers vertically integrate into making wine and getting into the marketplace. Now it's more of a consigliere thing where I'm helping generational thing.
That's great.
I help mentor a father-son team or figure out within 4 or 5 family members who's this going to wind up with, that sort of thing. And I wasn't trained for that. I went to art school, so it just happens that the experiences I've had, particularly with the Wagners, I was there during the transitional time that Charlie Wagner, the senior, had an opportunity to take a step back. He was in his mid-70s when I worked for him. And Chuck we're contemporaries. I think he's 2 years older than I am. He really picked up the gauntlet and took over at that time. I was there for 5 years. So
I'm just going to adjust this really quick.
Sure.
I'm just going to turn the Wi-Fi off because busy. She gets a lot of emails. So that was going to be one of the other questions that I had. I know we talked earlier. Langenried specifically is focused on Chenin Blanc and Cabernet Franc exclusively. Aside from the one tangent.
Yeah, right. The one
at one point.
I did make a Shiraz one time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, that it was a one-off. It was actually I made it at Luna when John Skupny was the winemaker there, and I ran into this guy who had a great piece of property across the street from the Silverado Trail from Duckhorn, and he'd been an IBM executive, had been stationed in Australia, and he suitcased some actual Australian Shiraz in, and it had every disease in the book.
Of course,
So I made a métayage deal with him. You bring me the grapes, I'll make the wine, and you get half of it, I'll keep half of it.
Right.
And I think we did. It was 1 bin, so it was barely half a ton. Abe Schrodner was an intern. So somewhere there's pictures of Abe foot treading this Shiraz.
Shiraz in a suitcase. Yes.
97 or 98.
The most sanitary transport possible.
Yeah. That's where he got his bona fides.
That's where he got his reps in at the beginning.
He was taking a sabbatical from St. John's.
Oh, that's so funny. So the other projects that you're doing, you get to work with some other grapes sometimes. So that's nice, because I feel like it would be hard. I mean, obviously you're incredibly passionate in Chenin Blanc and Cabernet Franc, and I think both of those grapes are more than deserving of respect. But yeah, it's almost like when people ask that question, like, if you could only drink one wine for the rest of your life, what would you drink? And it's like, I don't know. Like, I would just not pick, because then I'd be upset that I couldn't drink the others.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
That's great. Okay. And so aside from the other projects, I guess we should take a step back, and we briefly touched on kind of your history and your past, but I know online I was able to find that you had been in the wine industry, you'd worked as a somm, and then you'd moved out to California, started in the wine industry out here.
Yep.
back then, I mean, what did that transition look like? You just were able to pack up, move out here, and jump right in?
Yeah, it was really very fortuitous. I worked in, I have a fine arts degree, painting and printmaking, so I had to learn to make a living, and it was in the restaurant trade. And it started at a Chinese strip mall, Chinese restaurant, cutting onions and doing dishes, And we both, Tracy and I, got into finer and finer dining. And while we were in college is when we got bit by the bug. And she was in advanced French reading classes. I was working at like the only good hotel restaurant in Lawrence, Kansas that had a wine list. And I became an assistant manager and therefore in charge of the beverage buying. And one thing led to another. We wound up getting married in Europe, went to vineyards there, came home, worked this circuit in Kansas City. And Tracy actually got the position as the wine steward at this restaurant called Plaza 3 before I did. She was the assistant wine steward. This was in 78 or so. No normal guy walking in, grabbing the wine list would think she had any, experience, but she has a very good palate.
An incredible demand of the program.
Right. Yeah. And when the head steward left, because that's what they called us before sommeliers, they offered the job to Tracy, but on her other job, she was a maitre d' at another at a really fine French restaurant. And she liked that work better. And she said, I don't really want the job, but I know somebody who would really love this. And I was a captain at another French restaurant, and I needed to get out. And so I was there for like 3 years as a buyer and on the floor every night, and also doing corporate training for them, which was fun, but exhausting because I still had to work the floor.
Yeah.
In the summer of 80, we had come to California for our first visit in May of 79, and the light bulb went off and said, wow, I don't have to learn another language.
Right.
And we get the royal treatment everywhere because I worked for a company that had 190 restaurants, and everybody wanted our house wine business. And it was fabulous. My first place that we tasted wine was the little Yellow Child's house at Inglenook, which 14 years later became my office.
Wow.
The Friday of that trip, in the morning, we went to Clos de Vol. I tasted with Bernard Portet. We had lunch at the Islands in Mount Elena. In the afternoon, I met with Chuck Wagner. After our tasting, he invited Tracy and I to join his wife Cheryl and I to dinner. I know I ended up working for all three of them at different capacities.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was fortuitous. And I went home and just said, I'm more than buffing up my resume. I'm going to get a job. And we came out in the summer of 80, and I interviewed with a couple of wineries, Robert Mondavi, which was really cool, Domaine Chandon, and Wilson Daniels. But all of them wanted me to stay in the Midwest and rep wines out here. And the day before we left Kansas City for this trip, I got a copy of the Wine Spectator, which was a newspaper fold over at the time, in red and black, no color. And in the classifieds, there was this job listing for a company called Vintage Wine Merchants here in San Francisco. And they were looking to create a marketing and sales support department. And they were looking for somebody with the aptitude to hire writers, artists, photographers, to create copy and material, what they call content now,
right,
for their client wineries. And they had 10 wineries. And I interviewed on the way to the airport when we were heading back to Kansas City, and the guy loved it that I had a fine arts degree.
I was going to say, it's hand in hand, right?
It was. My dad just couldn't believe he had financed a fine arts degree and actually got a job using it.
and then also in wine, which obviously, it's how do you make a large fortune in wine? How do you make a small fortune? You start with a large
big
fortune.
One, right?
Yeah.
So that was in July. Middle of July was our anniversary, so the 14th-ish. And we moved here on Labor Day.
Wow.
And got a 23-foot trailer, put out 5 cases of wine that we had by that time amassed.
Your personal cellar, yeah.
The dog, we had a dog, and moved to San Francisco. And in Kansas City, if you want to find a new apartment, you'd get the Sunday paper on Saturday, mark out which ones you wanted to go see, find one, and put the deposit down by noon or 1 o'clock on Sunday.
Right.
That's what I assumed we'd be doing here.
Yeah.
Well, it took a couple months.
Yeah.
So the first week we stayed at the Beck's Motor Lodge at 16th and Market, right in the Castro.
Yeah.
We probably broke a record staying there for 3 nights. And even my bosses said, "Do you guys know where your motel is?" I said, "Yeah, but we had to because it was a courtyard one and we had the truck with all our belongings in it." So I finally found a place down on Townsend to store our stuff, and it took a couple months to find a place. But Vintage Wine Merchants was like a Wilson Daniels when Wilson Daniels didn't have imports before DRC. So we did national marketing for Montelena, St. Jean, Sutterholm, Stonegate, Raymond, McDowell, Concannon, Villa Mount Eden, and Parducci. And it was like getting a graduate degree in wine marketing.
Yeah.
And I started with a department with one person, myself. And when I left, there were 4 or 5 people working there. And we did shelf talkers. We wrote wine descriptions. I wrote most of them. I had a Selector 2 typewriter. It was before word processing. It had a correction key in it, the white tape correction key. Fortunately, my wife's a really great editor. And, but it was like writing pornography. You just had to slip in different adjectives here and there.
Yeah.
And some of the wineries, like Montelena, they wrote their own wine descriptions, and we just tailor them down to our needs. Jerry Looper was the winemaker at the time, and a really articulate guy, and still a friend.
So when you take the 3 paragraphs and you distill it to 3 sentences.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But the Raymond boys, Walt and Roy, they didn't want to write anything. In fact, I'd send them the preliminaries, which send your stats and winemaker's description, and all 5 of them would come back and it'd say, "Goes well with ham. Goes well with ham." Goes well with ham.
I love it. Just meat and potatoes.
Right. And they were meat and potato guys for sure. But they were joking too. They were just hilarious guys. So it was really fabulous. And we didn't have a car for the first year and a half. We had a Vespa, lived in Baja Pacific Heights, the upper reaches of the Western Addition. And I walked to work. I worked at Bush and Divisadero. Wow. Tracy worked downtown at One Market, so she had to get on the cocktail one every day. And lo and behold, 3 years into the deal, we had a baby. Not necessarily planned, but it was as it was. So we moved over to the Panhandle before it had a name for the neighborhood. And a larger apartment, same landlord, which was really cool. They liked wine and took us to dinners all the time and let us have a dog too. That was
best landlord you could ask for.
They were really nice people. And then about maybe 6 months into having a baby in the city, the company was changing a little bit. White Zinfandel was taking over for us. We started with 50,000 cases and now we were at 2 million. 3.5 years later, and that was consuming everything. And not that I didn't appreciate it. I'm still friends with the Trincaros. But it was getting me off path. And on that first trip in 79, I had met Chuck Wagner on that Friday, and I'd stayed in contact with him. He knew we had moved to California. And one day in November of 83, I was invited to do a tasting of Tête de Cuvée champagnes at Auberge. Auberge had just opened. So I drove up for that, and it was a rainy, drizzly November day, and I knew I needed a little break before I drove back to the city, and so I stopped in to see Chuck, and we got talking, and he said he was looking to hire a national sales and marketing director because his dad was doing too much work because he was doing it. Yeah. And so we made a deal. Now, Tracy and I packed up the truck again and moved up to Napa on Reed's first birthday in February of 84. So I did 5 years with them, went from 16,000 cases to 100,000 cases in 5 years. Then I went to go work for Bernard Portet. I was there 3.5 years during the recession of the late 80s. In the neo-prohibitionist era. And that was exciting because it was a lot of international work, but also my boys were all preteens, so I was traveling obscenely long, usually 2 weeks a month at least. When you go to Germany or Europe, you don't go on Monday and come home on Friday. Yeah. So then the opportunity came up through Tony Soder. Tony and I had become friends, and he was consulting for the Coppolas, and he approached me and said that they were looking to hire their first general manager, that they had never really had somebody operating the business for them, and that it meant that I wouldn't have to travel as much, and it was only 2,000 cases of wine a year instead of 100,000. And I always had a great respect and history for Inglenook. It was really a ground zero vineyard in Napa Valley, and still is. And the celebrity part I found interesting, but kind of distracting. Mm-hmm. But I did appreciate Francis's work for sure, and had studied it in school. So I thought I was making my life more simple. So I became the general manager of 1,200, acre estate with 125 acres of vineyard.
A stone's throw across the vineyard.
Yeah. And it was exciting. We were replanting some of the old vineyards and, working with Tony Soter and Scott McLeod. I hired Scott as the winemaker there. And the Coppola circus was exciting too. Yeah. And it was really sleepy for the first 2 years. We were refining what they were doing. They had been pretty rustic, kind of impenetrable wines, and Tony was giving them a little more grace and elegance and a little more respect to what we had growing in the vineyard. And I also did the grape sales. We sold most of them to Hugh Blind for Inglenook or BV, and I diversified that and got a good relationship with Dan Duckhorn going on. And we not only became friends, but he became a mentor. Still is. That's when we started to foment Lang and Reed. Mm-hmm. Tracy wanted to get back in the workforce, and it was bottom rung again. And I really didn't want her working weekends because I traveled too much. So I said, why don't we make a little wine, hon? I said, this is, Coppolas are cool with this. I said, I know how to buy and sell the grapes. We can custom crush them somewhere. Yeah. I know that, I said, the only thing I can't do is I can't go sell it.
Right.
That'd put me in direct competition with my own job. So in 93, I agreed to buy 1.5 tons of grapes from Doug Stanton in Oakville, across the highway from Ferniente. And Tony said he'd make it at his place. He'd do the prototypes at his place. I couldn't stay there and custom crush, but at least he would help me set up my protocols. Mm-hmm. So we made the prototype, which was the Vandelanne, or the early to market red that year. And we'd picked Franck for a number of reasons. First and foremost, we both were delighted. We always loved Loire wines. We had a lot of them in the Midwest. They were great mid-wine list wines instead of the great Burgundies and Bordeaux that we had on these lists. They were great, safe spots. And I always looked at the Loire Francs as Beaujolais, Beaujolais plus. Not to take anything away from Cru Beaujolais, which I think are really great and very complex wines, but more of just the daily Beaujolais that we'd get. Yeah. And I had a respect for the grape, and the train hadn't even left the station. And I knew we had to focus on one thing, which was Dan Duckhorn's playbook: make one varietal for at least 5 years, make your name known. If somebody says name 5 Merlots in Napa Valley or in California, be on that list. Same thing with Cabernet Franc.
That was the kind of thought behind it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And we also needed cash flow because we had no money. So that was why the early to market red too. Because I also thought living there only, by that time, I guess we'd been there in California 13 years. It really seemed that we oftentimes take ourselves way too serious there. Mm-hmm. And everything is Bordeaux this. And, I like Lafite. I want you to make a bottle of wine just like Lafite. Well, you can't do that, guy,
Yeah.
So that's why even the label is designed to be, frivolous. Not frivolous, but
light, playful.
Light. Yeah, playful. Yeah. It's wine. It's a grape juice, man. It's not, life or death.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Tony helped me, I said, so should I bring these in, like at 22, 23 bricks and we a little lighter in alcohol, a little lighter on its feet. And he says, no, you got to bring it, you got to get a little bit closer to 24 because we got to get, he says, making Cabernet Franc is like ice skating on a razor edge. He said, you want enough varietal character so it has its charm, but you don't want to go over the hill with it. You don't want the pyrazines to be really so overt because it'll turn people off. And this was really an older generation that had been accustomed to drinking, being turned off of Cabernet Sauvignon coming from Carmel and Monterey that had the veggie asparagus stuff.
Super bell peppery kind of characteristic, yeah.
So he helped me figure that out. And then I didn't make wine in 84 and 85 because of the Inglenook acquisition and was embroiled in that. And successfully brought it to the Coppola family, which was great. Very exciting. I think in my obituary that probably, especially at at undervalue and beating out two very important guys who I actually offered more money. They were two overbidders to us, but we had convinced them it was the right thing to do, was to re-enjoy these historic properties. Yeah. And so in 96, I left about a year and 4 months after the acquisition, had gone from 15 employees to 85. Really became an HR manager, not a guy helping with figure out what vineyard's going to happen in the future and that sort of thing. So I jumped off the diving board and that's our Legals founding year was 96. And that year we made the two wines, the Vin de l'Année and then a Vin de Garde, a more reserve style. So the early one was made at Luna, with John Consgard had just started that year with Mike Moon. And then the Premier Etage, which was our top level wine, Tony let me do at Etude. Same thing, so we could set the protocols up. And we've been in Custom Crush always. We were at Etude, Luna, then Kent Rasmussen, then at Honig. And in 2003, Laird had an alternating premise available. So we actually became a bonded winery within Laird that year.
Awesome.
And so we still make the majority of it at Laird. The two Napa wines, the Napa Chenin and the Napa and the 214 Cabernet Franc are made at Elise because Reed is working on those for me.
Well, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah.
So we did 20 harvests, making only 2 Francs. And Reed started to work in the business and did his 3rd internship at Domaine Bernard Baudry in Chinon. Took his fiancée Megan with him, and she fell in love with Vouvray. And so it was decided that that'd be a nice addition to a Cabernet Franc portfolio. Yeah. And so when they got home, it took us 4 years to find fruit because North Coast County Chenin Blanc is pretty rare these days. So we found the vineyard, the Norgard vineyard that I had worked with Parducci back in the early 80s. And that's it. Made 5 years of Napa Valley from a particular vineyard in Oak Knoll that was about 1 acre. Did that for 5 years, and then the grower pulled that out, and we now are set with a new grower in Napa who put in 2.5 acres. A really great grower, really close to where our original Napa fruit came from, and we got first crop last year off of it, so we're excited about that.
That's the dream.
Yeah, we'll see. And I really let Reed tell or sort of use his own thing for the Napa Chenin. I really control the Mendocino one a little more because it's under my thumb. Right. We agree upon it. Yeah. But we realize that the Mendocino is just so juicy and always on point, and it for only being able to make 200 or 300 cases. There's only one direction to do is to make it as rich and complex as we possibly can. Right. Yeah. Chenin can be made into anything, so we decided that a more Burgundian approach of barrel fermentation and a little batonnage, not a lot. We always we always start out doing a little more than you should. Typical Americans. If a little wood is good, a lot is better.
A little heavy-handed every now and then. Yeah.
Yeah. The first year. Reed lives really close to where Laird is, and I'm about 15 miles away. But when we were doing the stirring, it was, we didn't do any chalk marks. We just didn't, and Reed get home and say, hey, I stirred the Mendo today. And I go, oh, I did too. And so we started to keep track. Right. And we were, it was we realized after bottling, especially now when you taste it 10 years later, differing than a moderation thing. And this is where my consulting practice has been really handy because I work with a winery that has Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in Anderson Valley. And their winemaker, Stefan Vivier, and to taste Stefan's wines, see them as grapes, see them when they're being pressed, see them post fermentation, see them a year later in barrel, and knowing that, again, sometimes the less is more. It's going to do itself. Reed's always prone to say, well, let's hit it with this. And I go, let's not hit it at all.
So Vivier is doing a bunch of other consulting, right? But he kind of cut his teeth at High de Villaine, if I'm not mistaken. And then he has his own label now?
Yeah, Vivier.
Right. That's
awesome. He worked at DRC.
Okay.
In fact, the only time I have been to Burgundy, because the trip that we went to Bordeaux instead of Burgundy 45 years ago, I was fortunate to be with Stefan and had a all morning at DRC in 17. It was incredible. I could still taste it. Didn't spit at all.
No, why would you? Yeah, that'd be a crime.
It seemed like an insult.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing. And so, so you're kind of getting towards the second generation now, and I guess that can kind of bring us around to the Rockhound label. And then we can skip around. We can do whatever we want. But that kind of brings me to the point of Rockhound. So with Rockhound, you have Radiant Ridge fruit, and Reed's making these wines as well.
They are his wines.
A lot of traveling, huh?
Yeah. Well, they have through Reed's association with Russell Bevins, they have a contract. So it might go to one or two different operations. So he basically buys in when they're getting the grapes, and he goes down a couple times during the summer, and then they'll actually go down and bring the grapes back. And so they did 21 and 22. Unfortunately, it got squeezed out of 23.
I see.
Yeah, which is a shame. But, I also said, you'd love to have consistency, but they originally got squeezed out of 20, which was almost a godsend.
Yeah.
So, and it helps them get their foot in and get the story out. He did a Saignée on them too. So there was a little rosé that they did 2 barrels of, about 48 cases.
That's the one bottled in Magnum, right?
Yeah. And, of course, he's a marketing genius.
Yeah.
I said, a Magnum? And he says, Dad, when was the last time on a hot summer day that you went to go get a cold bottle of rosé and you wish you'd had 2 cold?
Yeah,
and I said, yeah, okay.
Well, that's perfect.
I said, yeah, I still have some brain cells left. It's pretty wine too.
The only downside is, I guess, if it's tall, you can't fit it in any of your shelves.
I know. Yeah. It is tough.
Our fridge, we use about 50% of it for wine.
Right.
And then we have one shelf for food because the wine bottles take up so much extra room.
The key in our tasting salon, when we serve it, we Coravan that one.
Oh, that's great. That's a good idea.
Which just, it sucks up those little canisters like crazy.
Oh, man. especially if somebody wants a glass afterwards.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
Has he put any thought into going in Estelle then?
I don't know. The original idea and why it was called Hawkbox was there was a triple entendre there. Okay. One is dedicated to the hawk boxes in the vineyards,
right,
which are the horizontal box or the vertical boxes. The horizontal ones are owl boxes.
Okay.
His son, my grandson, 8-year-old, is named Hawk.
I see.
And then the other thing was they were actually thinking of putting it in a box, bag in the box, but 50 cases didn't make any economic sense.
Yeah.
So
a little more challenging.
Right. But I think they'll continue it. I hope so. My mom loves rosés. So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's going to do well. And, I'm trying to rack my brain. There's another person that bottles mags of rosé, and it's just escaping me right now, but it's another pretty prestigious producer that you can only get it in mags as well. Yeah. I mean, so do you go down here at all? Do you help out?
I've been down there. I don't really help Reed on his production. He's got a lot of plates flying at any one time because under Elise, they've got 3 different brands.
Wow.
And then he also runs their custom crush operation, which includes us because he does our Napa wines at Elise.
That's great.
I taste along with him.
Yeah.
And I try to give him the wisdom of the fact that I've unfortunately hit a lot more Burgundy than he has in his life. And so for his birthdays and Christmas, I've, buying somebody, it's almost better to give them cash, but actually I've been giving them Burgundy.
That's great.
I'll try to find ones that fit the moment and trying to teach them the difference between the North and the South.
Right,
and, the specific things about it, which, you know, I got involved in the trade in the mid 70s. So, you know, the amount of wines that I've been falling in front of me, you know, I had two buddy friends where we'd all put together, you know, $50 together and buy a bottle of something, you know, and I've had more DRC than one person should probably have in their lifetime. And most times it's by the benefit of others.
It was so much more attainable back then. I mean, it's funny. I don't go on Facebook often, but I have this Facebook group, and that's a wine group. And, you know, rarely you'll see somebody post something and it'll be like a bottle of, you know, Chateau Latour, and it's like there's still old price tag on it. It's like $80, and I'm like the premiumization of the wine industry has just really kind of gone crazy. And I mean, the regions specifically, like Burgundy and like, well, super premium Napa, Cabernet Sauvignon.
Oh yeah.
Is there? I feel like your wines are always like really affordably priced comparatively.
Well, I'm kind of an old hippie, so the intent was that I wanted to be able to afford my own wines.
Sure, that's beautiful.
I'm getting to the point where there are a few I can't afford.
Right.
We started kind of doing some single barrel things that predominantly are utilized in our tasting salon and for, you know, our club. And we never really had a lot of direct to consumer until COVID, which was interesting.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you think about it, we are also in market. We were in 95% of our wine was sold through distribution channels, and 75% of that was sold in restaurants because retail doesn't necessarily have a Cabernet Franc section.
Right.
Unless it's a pretty specific store.
Yeah.
Same with Chenin. I mean, we walked right into that one too. Yeah. But restaurateurs get it. Right. And, you know, I mean, not necessarily that they have a Cabernet Franc section, but they, you know, it's really great for people who swim in the other reds. Mm-hmm. That's where most of our wine is sold. And we also try to keep the early to market one at a price where we can get and capture wine by the glass.
And that's the California appellated one. Was it always California appellated, or was that within the last couple vintages?
Started in 18.
18, okay.
When we started it in 96, it was Napa Valley.
Right.
And then in 04, Napa Valley went from about $1,200 a ton to about $3,000 to $4,000 a ton in that time frame. And I was also, when I started, I kind of had my pick of the vineyards, which was slim picking. I mean, there was only 950 acres at that time.
Right.
And it was all planted in really B grade land because nobody was going to give up good land for Franc or Merlot.
Right. If you're going to throw in 2 to 3% or something into a blend.
And not know why.
Right.
Which was they didn't know why. It was just that, you know, what they did it in Bordeaux, and then Joseph Phelps did it in 75. And so now we got to have all 5 grapes here.
Yeah,
What's Malbec?
Yeah.
What?
Who cares? Yeah. Put it in there.
Right. Get it in there. And, you know, it's an ancient grape. It's one of the primordial grapes. So it's really transparent, and it will show really good fruit. It will show really good ground, and it will do really bad in bad ground, and it'll overcrop. And so in the 90s was a real shift of mostly because of the replant of phylloxera, but later the respect of the grape. It started to be put in better ground and better clonal selections. Before the 90s, the available plant material was really terrible, and nobody cared. Mm-hmm. It was clone 1 and 2, which are actually the same clone. They were just heat treated at different times at Davis.
Cool.
That's
great.
You know, it bore heavily, but it also showed family. It would pick up any virus in the world. Yeah. The Niebaum clone is a neat one, but it also would suffer viral problems. And then there was the Phelps selection, which was reputedly a suitcase selection, but nobody really can figure out which one it was. But nowadays we're dealing with people who understand it, know that it needs drainage. Sauvignon Blanc's the same way. They are genetically almost identical except for the pigmentation.
And so that's, I guess, what caused them to blend Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc together to create Cabernet Sauvignon is because they're
You mean the
similar?
one-night stand?
Yeah.
It's about 500 years ago.
Right, yeah.
I talked to Carol Meredith about that.
Drama, right? It's still happening.
Right. Dr. Carol Meredith is the one who did the genome and published it in 97 or 98. And it was funny. I was doing consulting work for Chris Howell at the time, and he was head of the California Cabernet Society, which was a loosely knit group focused on Cabernet. And I said, look, you're going to serve for 24 months. I said, and they're going to wear you out. I said, because I did it, and it's sort of thankless. I said, but you can use it for PR. I said, but what you got to do is like maybe write a white paper. Mm. And he worked in Bordeaux, and I said, why don't you do the history of how did Cabernet Sauvignon wind up in Napa Valley? So he goes back to Pliny, and I mean, it has taken like 2 years because Chris is very methodical. And one morning I see on my news feed, it's like, UC Davis geneticist determines Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc are the progenitors of Cabernet Sauvignon. I said, Chris, I think you just wrote my paper.
I'll take a shout out.
Yeah. I said, thank you. So I had a lot of conversations with Carol about it, and it's very interesting. We all thought vinifera marched over from Persia. Mm-hmm. It didn't. It found its way naturally in Western Europe. So they think it might be related to, or the primordial before Cabernet Franc might have been something like Ciccolino or something like that. And she believes that the cross took place in northeastern Spain, southwestern France, Basque region.
Right.
Which would make sense.
Yeah.
And now, just last year they determined Merlot is also, that Franc is the parent of Merlot. We all thought, up till that point, it was thought to have been a morph. What is it when that, like the Pinot guys, that they change their colors all the time.
Morphological? Or...
Yeah, that it just happened in the vineyard by itself. Yeah. I can't think of the specific. Yeah, mutation. They always believed, or it was common thought that Merlot was a mutation of Franc or Cabernet Sauvignon before that. And they've determined that it was actually a cross, and it's a pretty obscure grape. I haven't memorized it yet. But even Shannon's in that whole mix of grapes as family members. It's really scary.
Wild.
And the Pinot guys all stand alone. Right. All those guys are all same genome.
Yeah.
And I believe they are mutations, Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc.
Of each other.
Yeah. I'm not positive of that, but.
Yeah, I think at least Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc.
And maybe Chardonnay.
Oh, jeez. It's just pure chaos.
I know it is.
That's nature, though. Nature is chaotic, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yep. So we were back to how we wound up from Napa Valley to a California appellation. Right. So in 2004, I was driving down the street one day thinking, how am I going to make any money? The grapes are more expensive than the bottle of wine ratio business. And I didn't want to make my life too hard, but boom, suddenly a light bulb went off. And I thought, wow, I've spent a lot of time in Lake County, and Sauvignon Blanc is the great white hope up there. They're genetically almost identical. I'll bet you Franc will grow really well in Lake County. So that's been our primary base source since 2004. And it still is a big proportion of the wine now. But they started burning in 2015. Mm-hmm. And I bought a lot of grapes that had problems and had to sell a lot of juice at great losses. And by 2018, I had started to source from La Cienega area, northern central coast, and some from Sierra Nevada. And so that was playing into the blend starting in 2018. And then the last two vintages, 21 and 22, there's about 22% from Lodi, from a particular producer down there who's doing it, making it to my specs, and then I bring it in and blend it. So it's a bit of it's morphing into, I think the next generation it's going to be more of a bit of a negotiant wine, as long as I make the base wines myself.
Yeah.
And these guys follow orders, work orders. I mean, not demonstratively. Right. They want to work with us. And, I'm looking at that future-wise. Everybody wants Chenin Blanc at that price range too. Yeah. And so I actually bought some bulk juice we're doing Bottle Rock this year, and they needed 20 cases of white wine at a price.
Right, yeah.
And I went and bought it in Clarksburg. It's beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
We just bottled it a week ago, and I kept a case for my mom because it's in Stelvin. She doesn't need to use a corkscrew. She's 97, so she likes her wine. Hates paying for it at the home.
God.
So we're looking at, okay, how could I have a nephew who is in the wine business too, is a winemaker. He was at Rivanna for about 5 years and then at Vinecliff for about 4 years. And now he's kind of doing selective consulting work and he really enjoys it. And he's working for some people in Clarksburg. Mm-hmm. So the place we would be doing it is right across the river from there. So I would have eyes and ears down there. And it's only an hour and a half from the house. It's actually closer than going to my son's place in Philo. See?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the interesting things is when we were talking about pricing earlier, and I'm trying to think of like other Cabernet Franc that has Napa appellation on it. Like the first one that comes to mind, because it's a classic one that I grew up with, was Silverado.
Right.
Silverado always had a Cabernet Franc.
Yep.
And then I'm trying to rack my brain, but all of them are, $20 to $30 more expensive than your Napa Cabernet Franc. And, similarly, if you could find Chenin Blanc at less, there's, during the day with Chambers, I rep Harmeyer wines.
Yeah, sure. I know him. He's a good guy.
He's a great guy. And I mean, it's so amazing to see how many different faces of Chenin Blanc that you can have from one region. And then additionally, we were working with Wade for a while. And the Wade Chenin Blanc also, those things, are retailing in the $20 a bottle price range. And it's really fascinating to see domestic Chenin Blanc that inexpensive.
Yep.
And I think Clarksburg, it must just be like the dream area to plant for that.
Well, it all moved out there when it disappeared from the North Coast.
I see.
When we moved here to California, there were 2,800 acres of Chenin Blanc in Napa Valley.
Holy shit.
3,000 Chardonnay.
Wow.
Now there's 7,000 acres of Chardonnay.
Yeah.
And 17 acres of Chenin Blanc.
It's just 17 acres.
Yeah, it was down to about 12 or 13, but
Chapelet ripped out.
Yeah, well, they took out 20.
3 acres.
Yeah, they had 20 and down to 3 now.
Yeah.
Yeah, Philip used to say, what did they produce? They used to produce like 10,000 cases of it a year.
Yeah.
And then they went 2 or 3 years without any, and that it was the public and the market said, what did you do that? So they have 3 acres now.
And I heard that the mom went.
Yeah, she wanted it back.
She's like, that's my favorite wine.
That's why they call it Molly's.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, they kept the torch alive for sure. And now it's everybody's little darling. The first vineyard that we had in Napa got poached out from under us twice. People wanting to make Chenin and offering the grower more than we did.
Yeah,
and it's more expensive than Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc in Napa Valley.
That's wild. Well, I guess there's less of it.
Yes, there is. So it's the same thing with Franc. Franc is the most expensive red grape in Napa now by $1,000.
That's nuts.
There's, again, remember I said 950 acres when we started in 96.
Yeah.
There's 1,250 today. Compared to Cabernet Franc or Cabernet Sauvignon, which in 1996 there were just under 13,000 acres, and now there's 24,000 acres. So the Uber blenders need 4 to 10%,
right? And
that's what's forced the market is the scarcity.
And I guess I would have assumed that Malbec was planted less, and if they're needing all 5 Bordeaux varietals just to tick the box for their bottle, I would have assumed that would have been harder to get. But
it is harder to get, but I don't think people are using it much.
Well, and I guess there's not as many people doing 100% bottlings or Cabernet Franc dominant bottlings. So
I think Merlot still has a command for the blends.
Right.
Petit Verdot for sure. Petit Verdot for about 3 years was the most expensive red grape because there's only 140 acres or something like that. But I don't see this swing happening where I see, we get the Grape Crush report every year and it shows non-bearing acres, which means they've just been planted. Right. They don't count them as grapes until their third or fourth leaf. I don't see that much planting taking place. I don't see the growth happening.
Yeah, I remember Petit Verdot was one that, like, the first time, well, maybe I'm misspeaking. It's been so long. So in Texas, the wine scene wasn't as big when I moved there in 2008. And when I left in 2017, it was more rife. And obviously, I was in Galveston. It's a beach town. It's not the heart of Houston. It wasn't Dallas. There's plenty of amazing restaurants that have been there that have been championing the wine industry for a long time. But to me, like the first Somme wines were like Stag's Leap Viognier and Stag's Leap. I think they did, or maybe theirs was a Petite Syrah.
Yeah. Stag's Leap Winery.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Uncle Domaney.
Yeah.
I saw Carl yesterday at this luncheon.
Really? Oh, at your old boys club.
I think he's 93.
See?
I said, "Are you still cheating at cribbage?" He says, "I can't find any partners." I said, "Well, the word got out." He's a very sweet man.
The sulfites will preserve, I think that's what it is.
They made their name originally with Petite Syrah. In fact, Petite Syrah was, in the day in Napa Valley, no Cabernet Sauvignon producer did not get a couple tons of Petite Syrah just in case it was a light vintage. Right. So Petit Verdot took over that place.
I see.
Because its intensity of color.
Yeah.
The anthracene set really well with Petite Syrah,
I see.
Obviously.
That's interesting.
So, some of those late 60s, early 70s Cabernets that everybody thought were 100% might have had a little Petite Syrah.
A little kiss of Petite
Especially
Syrah.
in 72.
Yeah. Or even the bottlings that they put blend, I'm sure that they probably snuck a little bit in. Right?
Could have been. Once Petite Verdot took over that place, and people had to pay for it, but it also polishes it. Petite Syrah is a little rustic compared to Petite Verdot. I used it in our upper level bottling of Franc for about 2 or 3 years because at the same time, even though I've always liked elegance and complexity more than extract and power, in the upper level, I was trying to get a little bit more out of it. And sometimes Franc can get a little screechy. And so I would put 1 or 2% Petite Verdot. And I had a grower, old Laurie Wood, who was great in Rutherford, who grew it. And you didn't need much, but it would just put a little bit of polish on it. So not only did it set the color, and I was never worried about the color. One of my other most favorite mentors was a guy named Dick Ward, who started Sainsbury with David Graves. And he was a cynic at best, but Grace always sardonic. And he'd just say, you can see through great Pinot Noir. It doesn't need to be opaque to be good.
That's too funny. Little did he know.
Right.
Yeah.
So I used it for a few years, and then then I came across that new vineyard that had the specific clone in it. It polishes itself.
That was it. That's where you
it had everything I needed.
So. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think to me, not to take anything away from Silverado at all, but Cabernet Franc has always been polarizing for me, just like Sauvignon Blanc has always been polarizing for me because of the pyrazine, that bell peppery characteristic. Right. It's sometimes it's too much, it's unenjoyable, and most of the time I've found myself to avoid Chinon and go towards Samour just for a little bit more kind of softness, warmness, and elegance, and less of that pyrazine. But the first time I tasted your wine when Bianca brought it home, it was Napa Cabernet Franc, and it was okay. And then I tried it, and I'm like, holy shit, it's really good, because I think I know that there's people out there that really love that vegetal bell peppery characteristic,
right?
And I like it too within reason. But so you're attributing that to just kind of picking earlier is how you're
no. I actually am picking a little bit riper nowadays, but if you look at the Loire wines now, I mean, that's been a revolutionary change since I first started looking at them in a serious way about production, which was in the early 90s. And that's it's due to 2 factors. One is all the kids went to school elsewhere besides their dad's cellar.
Yeah.
Mathieu Baudry, for example, came and lived with us in 1998 and worked at Chateau Bouchain. We had met the Baudry family in 97, and Mathieu became a really close friend. He's I don't know, he's in his late 40s now, but he was in his early 20s. He had just graduated from Bordeaux. We got drawn in because there was we were tasting with his dad and Henriette, Madame Baudry. And somebody broke in the room and in the tasting room and said, Mathieu just finished this, in French, and we're trying to kind of sneak out, and aunt shows up, the cousin shows up, Mathieu and his girlfriend show up, and a bottle of Magnum Gose comes out of the refrigerator. Tracy and I are kind of trying to get, this is a family thing. Maybe we're kind of, no. And Mathieu spoke really good English, and his girlfriend, wife, Hélène, spoke excellent English. Her mother was an English teacher in the French school system. And we got to be friends with them. We needed them. We were looking for somebody. We were there for our 20th anniversary. This is in 97. Mm-hmm. And our best friends were with us. They had 2 kids. We all co-parented. We had 2 boys. They had a boy and a girl. They're all in the same age group. And so we were going to take off. It was Flynn's 40th birthday. It's a day before our anniversary. And we had a friend who was selling Clicquot, Western State Regional Manager for Clicquot. Mm-hmm. And she had set a visit at Clicquot for this day. So we needed somebody to take care of the kids. Yeah. And Tracy bird dogged them right away. And so we were there 2 nights. It was really great. And we had this big, huge old castle that we had rented for a month. And the kids had more fun with Mathieu and Hélène than us,
That's so funny. And the age difference was like 15 years. Yeah, 10 years.
Max. The boy, Reed was 13 or 14. Brandon was a year older than him. Brandon was at that age where he was mad that he was taken away for so long from his friends. Yeah. And it was impossible to feed him. I mean, it was a teenage feeding, and you don't go to the hypermarchés and buy. I got a great story though. You want to hear it?
Sure. Yeah, please.
So we were there 5 weeks. The first week, not with the whole group, just our family went the last week of June. We had rented this old monastery for a month, but we couldn't move in until July 1. And so we went the week before and stayed in downtown Chinon in a cute little bed and breakfast pension, and kind of got a lay of the land, because this place, Grandmont, was about 4 miles away. Up the hill, Grandmont, it was on top of the hill. It was the ecclesiastic center where Chinon had the political fortress. It was the Castle of Chinon was not a party house. It was a fortress right at the military confluence. Fortress. Yeah. And, Richard the Lionheart was there, Joan of Arc. It's where The Lion in Winter was written. When
I see.
It wasn't Richard, it was which king was married to Eleanor of Aquitaine. I can't remember, but that was where he kept his family prisoners. I see. And he was king of England. So that was when England owned that part of France. Yeah. Just incredibly historic. I love Chinon. Walking down the cobble street and looking at the chateau above you, and you realize, oh, Joan of Arc walked down this street.
That's insane.
It is. Anyways, I digress. Then we move into the chateau, or the monastery, and it was the same as my mortgage. We rented our house out. It was like, and it was haunted. It had a wine cellar in it. I mean, like where they actually made wine in Roman times. It dated back to like 1100s, and all the monks had like carved stuff in the tufa. So I just gave it for Christmas. I had these kids on a rainy day. I got tracing paper and charcoal, and they all went and did rubbings on these. That's I had them framed, and now they're in their 40s. Like,
I love that.
This is a long time ago. So anyways, feeding Brandon is the story. For 3 weeks, we had no car. We had bicycles. So our name, the townies called us the Americans on the bicycles, because there were 8 of us, right?
Right, yeah.
And so one morning, Brandon is whining about being hungry, right? And I said, okay, boys, get your backpacks. Reed and Brandon and I get on our bikes. You don't have to pedal going down to town. You have to walk half the way coming back up. So we by this time we'd figured out where the best rillettes come from, because every shop made them. The fine little, charcuterie places and stuff. The butchers, everybody had rillette. And rillette is pork.
Right.
It's not salmon. It's not duck. Yeah. It's pork.
Or the lobster ones that they do. I've seen some lobster ones.
Yeah. Now, rillette is rendered pork, and everybody had a different recipe. And we found that the kind of old-time butcher in a cinder block building with bad lighting made the best Riette. So we drive up there, and I said, "Okay, Reed, go to the bakery. You know which one?" And he goes, "Yeah," because there was a young girl who would talk to him, and she was a cutie, same age and stuff. I said, "So you guys, go get 20 baguette." And Brandon's like, "Well, 20 baguette, okay." And so I go in, and my French is really bad. I could get by, but if it's about wine, I don't do it bad.
Yeah.
Un bon blanc,
Yeah.
So I go in, and the guy, big fuzzy mustache, apron, totally bloody, a real butcher. Place has got everything in the world. And I said, bonjour. I said, j'ai besoin un kilo en Riette, s'il vous plaît. And he goes, besoin? I says, oui. And he says, voudrais. Je voudrais. No, not, yeah. It's impolite. Okay. It's besoin means I'm in desire. I'm in need. I need it. Yeah, right. Yeah. And he said, un kilo? And I said, oui, un kilo. And he says, oh. He rips off the paper and puts the paddle in there, and he whips off. He says, un quarter kilo. And I go, oui.
Yeah, 1 kilo. Yeah.
He goes, un demi kilo. And I go, yeah, oui. Right at that moment, Brandon and Reed walk in.
With 20 back.
Well, and they look like missile silos out of their backpacks.
Yeah.
And the light's behind them at the door. And he looks at, and Brandon's like a foot taller than Reed at this point. And he goes, ah oui, un kilo. Yeah. Boom, boom. And he put it up on the scale, drew off the price, and then grabbed 2 sausages and put it on top and rolled it up.
Oh, I love it. That's great.
And so the next time, I walk in, he goes, un kilo?
Yeah, you're like, not this
time. Yeah. Un demi.
That's so funny. Wow. Yeah. I mean, we have a 1.5-year-old, and it's like, she eats so much. It's crazy.
That's great.
We got concerned that, the daycare made us a little worried. They said, she eats 3 times as much as all the other kids. Like, maybe she has an autoimmune disease or something. So we went to the hospital, and they're like, she's just a kid. And we're like, okay, great.
Oh, yeah.
So now it's more about just like, she wakes up and she goes like, nah. And we go like, okay, we'll feed you just a sec. So we have breakfast ready for her before she wakes up. She wakes up, she sits in front of her plate.
Harmony.
She eats her food. Yeah, exactly. It's the few minutes of peace while she's awake, right? Just let her eat and drink her water. Yeah, I was kind of doing some research online, and I was trying to find something about the Chenin, and I wanted to ask you, have you ever made I always mispronounce it, Milieu style?
We did. Okay. We did. On purpose, actually. This was 2016, I think it was. We were picking this vineyard, the Losi vineyard in Napa, and Oscar Renteria had taken over the vineyard management, and Oscar's been a friend for a long time. So I said, hey, Oscar, the normal thing we do is they've always allowed me to send 2 pickers in advance and cut off anything that had more than about 25% botrytis on it, because it does, Chenin is highly susceptible to botrytis in the conditions. And I said, but Reed wants to do something different this year. I said, how about we have 3 half-ton bins on the trailer. I said, how about we, Reed and I on 1 bin. We've got another friend, and then you give us 1 guy. And everybody throws, the lug box into that, and then we'll sort and use the front bin for the stuff that's botrytis. Mm-hmm. And I said, this way, the grower gets better than last year, because we used to just cut it and drop it on the ground.
I see, yeah.
I said, Dr. Losi will be happy, because we'll weigh it and pay for it, and but we'll keep it separate. And so Reed was so excited, and I thought, this is kind of fun, And little did I know that, he had to go home and go take the kids someplace, like right when they were loading my truck. They took the grapes to Laird for me for the wine, the weight, but they put the little bin in the back of my truck. Mm-hmm. So it's about that deep in grapes, maybe about 4 or 5 inches, and really rotten looking. I mean, it was botrytis. It wasn't gray rot. because it has a kind of a blue color to it. I know it sounds disgusting.
The noble rot. No, it reminds me of blue cheese, right?
Yeah, it is exactly. It's a very similar function. And of course, I said, so is the press at your house? And he goes, oh, no, Dad, you got to go down to Napa Fermentations and pick up the press. I said, did you make a reservation? And he says, yeah. I said, well, why didn't you pick it up yesterday? I said, and he goes, Dad, I got to get going. I got to get the kids.
Yeah.
You know? So I go to Napa Fermentation. The bees are following me.
Oh, God. There's so much sugar.
They're following me through Napa, right? It's like, so I get there and they're very sweet people, but of course I didn't pick it up at 8:00.
Right.
So I get the little press, not the big press. So we'd do 4 batches in his garage.
Yeah.
With the bees.
With bees and moldy grapes.
And we broke a carboy of juice. I mean, it took a month to get the bees and the flies to get coming to it. So he fermented it in
ants everywhere.
Oh my God. Yeah. It was like he finally had to do a power washer.
A mini ecosystem. Yeah.
So he fermented it in a 15.5 keg, and he's never bottled it. It's down to now a 6 liter, or not a 6 liter, but a 6 barrel keg.
Oh, I see.
It's really delicious. It's very, what you would imagine. I could imagine. It's like liquid. It's like vanilla.
Right.
It had high acid. It was, the regular wine came out at 7.8 TA.
Yeah.
It was ripe. It wasn't obscenely ripe. It was like at 32 or 34 bricks.
It doesn't feel that high compared to like German Riesling.
Yeah.
Going in at 40 plus.
Right. But, even the great Sauternes aren't as high as people imagine.
I see.
Because I worked with Chateau Saint Jean for so long, and Dick Arrowwood was famous for making his little dessert BAs and TBAs and some of those were at like 50, 60.
Yeah.
Those were, some of them were totally coffee brown, but were still delicious.
Yeah. It's so like when a Sauterne hits that like 70 to 80 year mark and it just turns like black brown color. Yeah.
Anyways, the market for that stuff is really, non-existent.
Challenging.
Unless it's Icam or Oué.
Yeah.
I have had, for my 65th birthday, the year before, Mathieu and Hélène and their kids came and spent a month with us. And he brought me in 1953 Oué Molieu. And so the next summer was my 65th birthday. And we drank it. It was incredible. We had it for first course.
Yeah.
Not dessert, because by the time dessert, it's like...
Yeah.
The only bummer was the fact that, we had a table of 7, and Cindy Paulson and who owns Mustards, and her husband were there, and John Konsgaard and Maggie was still with us, and Carl Domaney, and one other person was there too. I don't remember. So we kind of had to share it between 2 tables.
Yeah.
A Magnum would have been better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah. But I'm working on when I retired from the restaurant trade. These were the days where distributors would floor stock stuff for you,
right? Because
they had to. We didn't have overnight printing, so we'd print wine lists 3 times a year or twice a year. But I always had, like I could buy single one-off cases, and because I had clients who just, what do you got special today, John? And so I had already reserved this 11 bottles because I had drank one of them. It was a 1971 Corton Charlotte Dumas Hospice du Bon. And I'm going to buy this when I retire from the restaurant trade. When I get off the floor, I'm going to buy this for myself. Right. And every time I drink a bottle, I'm going to think, God, you saved your life
I'm so happy
and your marriage.
Yeah.
So lo and behold, the week before, the guy he worked, it was for McKesson when McKesson was in the wine business. And Mike Corso is a great importer in Chicago today. It was Mike Corso. We used to call him the curator, not the salesman.
That's so funny.
So he comes in with the annual offering of a Chem. And 75 vintage. I said, yes, I'll take. He says, I've earmarked you for the 2 cases of, of half bottles. They come in a wooden box and straw, 24 to a case. I said, yeah, that's good. He says, how about 750s? I said, 750s never really work. Right. I said, it's got to be a big crowd for that, especially at the price we have to sell it for. I said, So, no, I'll pass on the 750s. He says, well, I have Magnums too. And I said, Magnums?
When I retire, that'd be a nice treat.
Six in a box? He says, yeah, 6 in a box. And I said, how much are they? And he says, $62 each, $62 each. So I bought a case for the winery, or for the restaurant, for the list. And I know they had it for like 15 years, a Magnum of a Kim. Hey. Well, I have one. Yeah. I still do. Yeah. And I'm thinking that, next year might be the year. Yeah. Because I don't want to die and not have consumed this. And the ullage is really in good shape. Yeah. It's not bronzed out yet too far.
Right.
So I thought, 50 years old would be perfect. Yeah. It's just now who to invite.
Yeah, that's
and where are we going to get the foie gras?
Who to invite and who not to invite, right?
The main dilemma is, where do we get the foie gras?
Yeah, make sure Reed doesn't post it on social media. Everybody else is going to be pissed. Yeah. What the hell, John? You didn't invite me.
Right. Well, Reed will be there first. Reed and Megan. It's Megan's, that's her mom is, stickies.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But when we had, I have a great friend who's supposed to sell our wine in England and does occasionally. But he's really in fine and rare, and they come over and spend time with us, and he always brings like a mixed case of stuff, and he tries to sell it while he's there. Mm-hmm. One time he brought a pre-prohibition bourbon and got big money for it too. But this one year he couldn't sell the was it 28? Yeah, 27 or 28 a Kim, and this was when Terra was still open in St. Helena. And we knew them well because Lissa Domaini, Carl's daughter, and Hero lived next to us for many years. And so we called Lissa and said, we're coming into dinner Friday, and we have this bottle of Chateau of Yquem 27. And what do you suggest? And she says, I think you have it for first course, and Hero will, saute some foie gras. And so it was, a tostini and a piece of peach that had been grilled. Yeah. And then the foie gras. And Perfect. It was like, I could call this a day.
Yeah. The last time I had foie, we went to Boulevard and we sat down, and it was an insert because you can't sell it now or whatever. Right. And they gave it to us as an insert. We got some foie toast in the mid course. You want more Chablis?
Sure.
They gave it to us as a mid course, and so then we, obviously being absolute gluttons, they said, do you want dessert? And we said, we'll take another round of the foie toast, and then we got a bottle of Krager to go with it.
Oh yeah.
And it was awesome. John always does an incredible job taking care of us. The other question I guess I have about the Chenin Blanc is, have you done sparkling? Do you have any intention of doing sparkling? I guess a pain in the ass.
The girls want it. I'd accommodate them, but Reed just said, Reed is taking care of one or two sparkling projects for other people, and it's obviously under somebody's purview, but he just says it's such a pain. And I was encouraged by it, but then it would reduce our 750 bottlings. And just last week or 2 weeks ago, I bought Francois Pinot and his son's running it now. I bought their sparkling for $11 a bottle on last bubbles or something. And then same with, I bought Mulderbosch, 2 bottles, 3, 4, I don't know, it was $9 each. So there's no market for if it doesn't say champagne.
Yeah, it's going to be challenging too. I mean, we even see domestically sparkling in the $40 to $60 range can't sell. Right. And that's Blanc de Blanc, right? Yep. I mean, we have very lucky to have Fela Sparkling and Melville Sparkling, and those are incredible wines, but it's challenging. Even Liquid Farm, he has a champagne that he has made in France for him, and even that we struggle with. And it's interesting. It's hard to imagine that so much of the domestic sparkling market is captured under pet nat or giant companies' umbrellas, right? Because it's wild. And I guess it must have been terrifying to watch that happen throughout your time in the Napa Valley, to watch so many people get kind of pushed out or bought out.
Champagne by its nature, not just on the broad market, yes, right. Understanding that, but champagne by its nature until the revolution of the small the grower market was always a, economy of scale deal. Mm-hmm. Chandon started with that idea. When I first met Stu Harrison, he was the national sales manager at Chandon. This was in '79. And we convinced him to open Kansas City market. Just let me have it at Plaza 3, because we have 180 restaurants around the country. That's an all California wine list, abbreviated as it was. It was maybe 20 wines, but it was really revolutionary at the time. But Houlihan's was also ahead of the game because they were pouring all premium spirits out of the well too. That's why we had clout with Co-Brand, which, they had a great cellar of stuff. Yeah. That's where that 61, magnums of Lafite came from. But I told him, I said, obviously you guys are going to try and grow this thing. And I said, in about 4 or 5 years, you're going to need a national account. And I think Houlihan's might have been their first national account. Wow. And, I still have the card. It was, we're introducing domain. We had also introduced Schramsberg about a year before. Right. Because before then it was Hans Cornell. Yeah. Was the only method Champenoise being made in California to speak of. And, Hans was a good old guy, but he also used odd grapes for his stuff. Yeah. It was all really sec sort of material. But in California, I think that eventually, I know 2 or 3 guys who specialize in doing, small lot for wineries, and that, it just takes, Champagne is just a different brand. It's a different, it is so economy driven for the brand, and on the other hand, seeing Napa Valley, it's still, the majority of wineries are still family owned, but it's who's the family. And there's been besmirchments that, Coca-Cola owned Sterling for a while. Yeah. Then they got out of the business because it was, obviously not a lot of return on investment at that point. Because they probably tried to run it like not a winery. Yeah, right. Yeah, like a Coke factory. Yeah. And, same with Pillsbury bought Souverain, bought it from Lee Stewart. Souverain was originally at Burgess. And then they sold it to Gallo. No, Pillsbury built Rutherford Hill Winery, which was originally Souverain. Okay. And then they built the facility in Sonoma, which became Coppola. I see. But after Pillsbury sold out, it was, I don't remember who owned it. We went through flanks of different ownerships. Mm-hmm. And Rutherford Hill became Rutherford Hill with the Carpi group, Carpi and Jaeger and Laurie Wood. And then Terlatos bought that. They own Rutherford Hill. So there have been these corporate things coming in and out. I mean, Hubline is the epitome of it, which bought Inglenook in '63 and then bought BV in '68 and went through a 12-year federal antitrust suit for that. And they won. Hubline won. They prevailed. Yeah. But in the process, they destroyed Inglenook. Right. Yeah. They wouldn't put any money into it because they were likely going to have to sell one of them, and they decided that they would sell the one that had all, the vineyards right there. Yeah. I think the thing that I find a little distressing is there is a big battle between growth and preservation. A lot of the independents are worried about the council stopping any vineyard development. It's being accused that if you follow the rules, it takes you a long, long time, and it's very expensive, and then they're likely to say no. Mm-hmm. And that's a shame. That has to be ironed out. Yeah. But on the other hand, we don't want to, kill the goose that laid the golden egg. We are in an agricultural preserve. It forces land prices to be artificially high. And a lot of the people who are getting into the business are doing it as second business. Right. And I'm getting a little weary of the noblesse oblige concept of, I'm just a steward of the land. I'm taking care of all these people. And so what about those strip malls you built all through, Galveston and Houston, but now your name's on a label and, I'm going to sell it to Latour.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I joke. I play this joke thing with a couple friends that, number one, if you sell your winery, you're not allowed to have another one.
Yeah, that's funny.
Not even like a.
Don't ever put your name on it. Yeah, that's the other rule that we heard earlier.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Don't sell your own name.
Yeah.
Not even a 5-year anti-compete. You just can't ever be in the wine business again. Funny. If you sell it and take the big ring, you're done. Don't do it again.
That's funny. That's too funny.
I think what's kind of interesting is that a lot of the big guys, I look at some of the brands that have been bought recently that really had very little production, but had great credo to them. Masakan, he's a buddy. He's really dynamic, and he's working for Gallo now, which is great, and it'll allow him to achieve what he wanted to achieve,
right?
And walk away and do something else. He's an entrepreneur and a very bright guy. The family ones, the ones that really bother me, that when they get sold and everybody says, "Oh, they sold out," and you don't know the family dynamics. Doug Schaefer's a friend, and I know that he took a lot of heat.
Yeah.
But he's got 4 kids, more than that. He's got 5 kids. None of them wanted to be in the business. He has a brother and a sister. They're not involved. He couldn't see a succession plan that included the harmony as this multi-generational thing. And, and I came to the defense of him many times. I just said, do you realize how much this has been a generational thing? I said, do you know how much time John Schaefer dedicated to the community, and Doug, Clinic Olay? I could go down through a huge list, hey, good luck to him. Great for him. It had its time. It didn't serve their family any longer. I mean, the Highway 29's littered with people who were not successful, who wound up selling out. John Daniels in Inglenook never made money.
Yeah.
And had a wife who hated the wine business. There was logic to a lot of these things.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's really hard too. Like, I mean, one of the whole reasons I wanted to do this, and the whole reason I'm the reluctant somm, is because it's like, there's just so much pretense in the industry, and there's so much judgment, right? Like this wine is superior to this wine, right, or you shouldn't drink that wine because of X, Y, Z. And it's like, it's the same thing. It's like, why would you put your thoughts and your beliefs on someone else, right? Like, if somebody decides to get out of something, it's like, it's probably the best decision for them,
right,
their well-being,
and it's
their family's
thing.
Well-being.
Yeah.
Let's leave it at that. You know what I mean? So
my closest friend, a guy named John McDonald, started Boulevard Brewing Company in Kansas City in 1989. It was supposed to be 87, but we couldn't get the financing in place. And we were involved. Tracy and I were involved, and I helped him write the business plan. And it was, he and I both went to art school, so we had to learn to make a living somehow. Mm-hmm. And my son Jersey used to joke that, so you 2 art students wound up being in the alcoholic beverage industry. So he grew it to the 9th largest craft brewer in America, and his kids didn't want it, and he wasn't sleeping at night. When the business plan was drawn up, it was supposed to be a 7,000 barrel brewery that employed 8 to 10 people. When he got to the tipping point, he was a 220,000 barrel brewery, the capacity to go to 500,000 overnight because the plant was there.
Yeah.
And it had 180 employees. He said, I'm not sleeping at night. He says, I got to get, he says, this is, and he's from some family changes. His parents passed away and that sort of thing. And this was in 13. So we went in, and he wound up selling to Duvel. And he could have made twice as much by selling to Coors, because Coors wanted to buy it.
Right
in the middle, Kansas City, beautiful. It was a beautiful facility. It had great street creed.
The beers are top class.
Right.
Yeah.
And, he did what he needed to do for his family. Yeah. And, his biggest worry now is his wife has an apartment in Paris, and he just built one in Oporto.
Right.
Though they live in Kansas City, it's like, okay, are we going to go to Paris first, or are we going to go to Oporto first?
Yeah.
The first couple of years, he was investing in everything. And I mean, all the fakers that came out of the woodwork, everybody needed money, and you should invest. after about 3 years, he says, I may not be the entrepreneur I thought I was. Yeah. He says, I think lightning struck right the first time.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you said, you sold one.
Right.
You should just stop, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome. Okay. I guess we should probably wrap. We've had a good while. Do you want to have any closing statements? Any knowledge to impart on the listeners? Or
well, my basic philosophy is if you have a corkscrew, use it.
Yeah. I love it. Perfect.
Especially, the people who have it as an avocation, I'm a little bit jealous because they get to do this just for the sheer pleasure and joy of drinking wine and all the stuff in the positive way of what goes with that conviviality, the history. I went down the deep rabbit hole in the early aughts. I was getting cynical about the business, and then my son went away to college, and on their Jersey, this was in 04, 05, went away to college, and his best friend is Kyler Williams, John Williams' son from Frog's Leap. Okay. So they came home, kids come home for their freshman year, but the next year they don't come home again. Yeah. So they came home and they said, Jersey said, Dad, I know you do classes and stuff. He said, would you do some tastings for Kyler and I? And I said, yeah, sure. So I set up 4 tastings over the 2 months they were going to be there, and normal stuff, here's 6 different reds, here's 6 different whites. Here's a vertical of, this, here's a horizontal of that. And I came to understand that, one, I had a better nose than I thought I did. And it was, I was trained visually because of being in art school, but after at that time, 30 years, 35 years in the business, I had developed a taste memory, a smell memory that was pretty good. And I told them, I said, you guys, because you grew up here in Napa Valley, you went to school, you could wear wines, you could wear a winery shirt to school. Mm-hmm. Couldn't do a beer shirt. No. You'd have to take it off, right? I said, more than you know. Yeah. And suddenly it dawned on me that the same thing had happened to me. So I went into a real exploration of the sense of smell. Mm-hmm. And I took classes from this guy who comes from Bordeaux, and it's just fascinating. And how much it is in your memory. It's the primordial sense. It's the closest to your memory bank. A smell can evoke, a memory before you even know what you're smelling. Mm-hmm. And you can train it. We don't use it. When we stood up as a humanoid, we made sight the primary sense and hearing the second. When we were on the ground like a dog, we had to smell. Smelling and tasting, yeah. So it's like the beauty of the wine business is just this rebirth. And I started reading about this guy, Luca Turin. And Luca's a contemporary of mine. He's in his early 70s, mid 70s. And he's this incredible scientist who really discovered how our sense of smell works. And it was denied him for like a decade. He came up with the concept or the theory and proved it. And then the perfumery guys and all the other people didn't want this out. And so it was like Ibsen's Enemy of the People. Right. They wouldn't accept the truth. And it's a fabulous book. It's called The Emperor of Smell or The Emperor of Scent. Luca's book is good, but I'm not a mathematician or a scientist, so it was really too dense for me to understand how molecular things work. But the novel is about his life. But he was loved wine too, and also loved perfumes. Mm-hmm. So this was where this had come from as an avocational thing. But he has a great quote, and I never get it quite right, but it's like, apart from the fact that wine is so enjoyable, it's just amazing to think that so many different scents and complexities can come out of a simple piece of fruit. Yeah. And no other fruit does this. Yep. We don't pick up a banana and say, oh, it has a little whiff of Chardonnay to it. Watermelon. Yeah. Right. It just amazes me. And my dad, who, was the greatest generation, moved to Napa Valley a couple of years after we didn't drink for 35 years and got into wine, took classes. But before he did, he'd come and help me at Camus, salesman's kits and stuff. Yeah. And he'd see these guys come and pay cash for special selection and walk away with these wooden boxes and stuff. And my dad, and Caymus was a pretty funky place. It's there was nothing fancy about it. And he goes, wow, all that fuss over a little grape juice.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't know. I still love it. I still enjoy it. I really, to wrap that up, is I really feel for those who have it as an avocation as opposed to a vocation, because we have to think about it.
Yeah.
And they can just enjoy it.
Yeah.
I don't do a lot of training on faults. I used to do that when I was younger, but it can totally destroy my enjoyment, because
the whole experience
by its own act, it's a fault. We're stopping nature from making it vinegar.
Yeah.
So
that's beautiful. Yeah. I think I think that's incredibly well said. I think that's a perfect way to wrap it. John?
It is. If you have a corkscrew, use it.
Yeah. Use it.